Welcome back to Tabletop Assault. I'm Ross, and today we're going to be having a look at the new Necron Codex. So we're going to see what the Undying Legions have to offer. Now, it's going to be quite a long one. I'm going to look at the detachments, looking at their enhancements and stratagems, and also all the data sheets that they have to offer. Now, I am going to begin with the TLDR. This will just be sort of key highlights that I've picked up from the Codex, key parts that very quickly people will want to see and get an idea of what's going on in the Codex. Some of it will be good, some of it will be bad, but it will just really give you an idea of what some key changes might be to your playstyle, and then we'll start going into the rules in far more in-depth style. With that, let's have a look at some quick changes of the Necron Codex. Onto my TLDR here, just going over some of the key changes. So, in terms of detachments, we've got two generalist ones, one that's a bit focused on destroyers, one that's focused on Canoptek's and Cryptek's, I guess, and Lichguard and Triarch one. Now, in terms of units that have gone, Orikan, Zandrik, Oberon, and the regular lords are all gone. It's just the Overlord there now. The Res Orb has been reduced quite significantly. It's once per battle. At the end of any phase, you resurrect D6 wounds. Cryptek's can't join Lichguard units. Warriors, their numbers as Legion is changed to allow them to reroll the dice to see how many wounds reanimate. So no longer are they looking at D6 and then more if they're on objectives. That's changed quite a wee bit. Lichguard, their -1 to wound now is -1 to wound if strength is greater than their toughness. Doomsday Arc is now strength 18, so that is quite strong. And then we've got C'tan's now all gained Feel No Pain, not on the Tesseract Vault though, so I think that's really going to even out some of the C'tan's. And the Canoptek Reanimator is now, its ability is reduced to 3 inches rather than 12 before. I think that is quite a change for that unit there. And then Crypto Thralls no longer have a 4-up Feel No Pain, and as they can only join Cryptek's, they're not joining Lichguard. So some key areas there. I know that Lichguard Blob was quite a popular one to sometimes have, make an invincible unit of Lichguard. I think with these changes that's going to be quite a bit more difficult. On to first part of rules, and we're going to discuss reanimation protocols. So looking over the rules there, largely it hasn't changed how we were working beforehand, which to a degree I'm quite thankful for, because I feel it is still quite impactful the way it is operating at the moment. I do believe that when it comes to reanimation protocols, it has been one of the hardest rules to balance in the game. In some editions I've seen it being far too overpowered, and in others near pointless. And this is because giving out free models, essentially free points, if it becomes too much, then you will see that you're just getting a lot more points throughout the battle than your opponent. And so I feel with this one it is good. It is countered by just concentrating fire on a particular unit and wiping them out systematically one at a time, then you're not going to see as much of an impact there. Rather, if you spread your firepower onto a Necron force, you're really going to struggle. So I suppose when it comes to rain, it's very important to ensure that doesn't happen for a Necron force. The one thing I would say is that how it was working before this codex, in between sort of the edition starting and now, is that there was a lot of support reanimation, and it was making quite a lot of models come back. I feel that's not going to be the case anymore, just with a lot of how the rules have changed. There is less synergy to bring about as much reanimation as there was before. First detachment we're going to look at is Awakened Dynasties, and its detachment rules command protocols. While Necron character or model is leading this unit, each time a model in this unit makes an attack, add 1 to the hit roll. Simple enough bonus. I feel it's going to be impactful in most games, just about all of them, but the one thing is that we are seeing that there isn't as many units that can actually be joined by Necron characters, so you might be a bit limited on there, that your choice might not be as great as you thought it were, but it's still not bad. Just there's some things like Tomb Blades just can't be joined by anyone, so there is some ways that you're not going to benefit from that entirely. Depending on the type of force you want to take though, there are still a great many that can benefit from that, which is quite good. One thing I've had from personal experience, precision is your enemy here. Now, I've unfortunately had a few games where there's been a ton of sniping units, precision, and they just simply take out my characters. Not only does it reduce the amount of reanimation I had, it also removed this ability as well. which is not ideal. But I do think it's quite simple enough and one that's easy to use and hopefully get a benefit from in just about most games. On to the enhancements, and we have Veil of Darkness, which more or less works the same as before. Once per battle at the end of your opponent's turn, if the bearer's unit is not within engagement range of one or more enemy units, the bearer can use the enhancement. If it does, remove the unit from the battlefield. Then the reinforcement steps of your movement phase. Set up the unit anywhere in the battlefield that is more than 9 inches horizontally away from all enemy models. Netherrealm Casket, Necron model only, while the bearer is leading a unit. Models in that unit have the stealth ability. Phasal Subjugator, which is an aura ability, Necron model only, while a friendly Necron unit, excluding character units, is within 6 inches of the bearer. Each time a model in that unit makes an attack, add 1 to the hit roll. And Inegit's Dermal Bonds, I might pronounce that wrong. Necron models only, the bearer has the 4+ Feel No Pain ability. Veil of Darkness, all reliable, take it for many editions, it's always been quite useful, so yep, glad to see it back. Netherrealm Casket, stealth, very good for survivability, very handy on big blocks. Phasal Subjugator, helpful if you're not able to get so many characters into units. It should also be noted that where you might have to join units, this you don't, so this could help out just about any unit around it. You know, you've got your Doomsday Arcs, your Monoliths, having that +1 is very handy, so I think that one took quite a lot of use beforehand, so it's good to see it back. And the Feel No Pain, yeah, it's good if you are planning to have a particularly dueling character. I prefer the other ones personally, just because I think Veil of Darkness is good for repositioning. Certainly the Phasal Subjugator, very good. I think stealth is good for survivability. If you are going to be dueling, then yeah, 4-up Feel No Pain is good. But generally I think these enhancements are all very good and could all see quite a bit of use. Awaken Dynasty Stratagems, we have Protocol of the Eternal Revenant for 1 command point, Epic Deed Stratagem. You can use this in any phase, 1 Necron infantry character when they're destroyed, you can use this stratagem, and at the end of the phase set your model back up in the battlefield as close as possible to where it was destroyed and not within engagement range of an enemy unit, with half of its starting number of wounds remaining. And you can only use this once on any target in a battle. Then we have Protocol of Undying Legions, which is 1 command point strategic ploy stratagem, and you use this in your opponent's shooting phase or the fight phase, just after an enemy unit has attacked. And you choose 1 Necron unit from your army that has 1 or more of its models destroyed as a result of the attacking unit's attacks. Your unit can activate reanimation protocols and reanimate D3 wounds +1 if a Necron character is leading your unit. It's very handy to have a Necron character come back. You know, you can restore buffs to a unit potentially, which would be very good. And also that you've got the on-tap reanimation for 1 command point, very good. Some of the other ones you'll see later on have a bit more restrictions to them that makes them a little bit more difficult to pull off than, say, this one here. Very simple. It is just 1 command point to reactivate your reanimations, which is quite good. Protocol of the Hungry Void, which is 1 command point, and it's a battle tactic. Fight phase is when it's used, and the target is 1 Necron unit from your army that has not been selected to fight yet. Till the end of the phase, add 1 to strength characteristics of melee weapons equipped by models in that unit. In addition, if there's a Necron character leading the unit, till the end of phase, improve the armor penetration characteristic of melee weapons they have by 1. This is not cumulative with any other improvements to armor penetration. And Protocol of Sunstorm, which is 1 command point, strategic ploy stratagem, use it in your movement phase, 1 Necron unit from your army is the target. Till the end of the turn, ranged weapons equipped by models in this unit have the assault ability. In addition, if a Necron character is leading your unit until the end of the phase, you can reroll the advanced rolls made for this unit. So I think both these are also very useful if you're going to use a combat unit. +1 strength, not the biggest benefit, it is still going to have times where it's useful, but the extra AP will be useful in a lot of situations, so that's quite good. And then the Protocol of Sunstorm, I find that Assault is more useful than some people may think, mainly because you can then, advance, and then you can do your actions, I guess they were, but when it comes to secondary objectives, they generally need you to be able to shoot. Having Assault on your weapons allows that. So that just gives you the option to either fire or activate certain abilities that require you to be able to have shot. So that's quite useful, just giving you, bonuses that if you have a Necron character in the unit. which is really, really good because that's sort of keying up a lot with the detachment rule, and I really like it when that happens. Protocol of the Conquering Tyrant for 1 command point. It's a Battle's tactic stratagem using the shooting phase, and on 1 Necron unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot this phase. Till the end of the phase, each time model in the unit makes an attack that targets a unit within half range, reroll hit rolls of 1, and if there's a Necron character leading the unit, then they get to reroll all their hit rolls instead. It's very, very handy if you are within half range. And Protocol of Vengeful Stars, which is 2 command points. It's a strategic ploy stratagem. You're using your opponent's shooting phase just after an enemy unit destroys a Necron unit from your army. You target 1 Necron character unit from your army that was in 6 inches of that Necron unit when it was destroyed. And after the attacking unit has resolved its attacks, your unit can shoot as if it was the shooting phase. It must target only that enemy unit. When doing so, it can only do so if that enemy unit is an eligible target. So I think Conquering Tyrant, fantastic for 1 command points, and again, it's playing to a bonus for the detachment. Really love it when we see them with the enhancements or the stratagems. And Vengeful Stars, it's a bit expensive 2 command points because there is a couple of stipulations on it. You know, it's not simply the unit itself gets damaged and then fires back. It has to be a destroyed unit, and it has to be near a unit that has a character in it to be able to fire back. So a few stipulations in that one that make it a little bit harder to pull off. Very, very handy still, but just that little bit trickier because of a few caveats. On to Annihilation Legion, and we're going to have a look at their detachment rule, which is called Annihilation Protocol. Each time a Destroyer, Cult or Flayed Ones unit from your army declares a charge, you can reroll the charge roll. If one or more targets of that charge are below half strength, add 1 to the charge roll as well. Now the affected units of this one should be Skorpekh Lord, Lokhust Lord, Hexmark Destroyer, Flayed Ones, Skorpekh Destroyers, Ophydian Destroyers, Lokhust Destroyers and Lokhust Heavy Destroyers. So I do think it is a solid bonus, as we've all failed key charges before, so it's going to save you a command point there probably. So unless you're into failing again after you do rerolls, so that can happen. Now I feel that there should have been more of a bonus for the ranged destroyers as well. You know, I get this one's more for the sort of melee side, but it would have been nice if we are going to be really aiming for the sort of destroyer side in that one. Give us something for ranged. I've said maybe give them the pistol keyword so they can fire in combat. I'm not too sure. Maybe that, I don't know. I just feel that considering destroyers really did begin as a ranged unit and now they have evolved into something else which is quite good. Now they've got combat variants. I just feel that it would have been nice to have that on top of it. After all, it's not an army-wide rule in terms of not every unit is benefiting from it. It is a select few, so those select few should see much stronger benefits from it. And I just believe not rewarding the ranged ones. I feel it's a bit of a wasted opportunity to have that be a bit impactful there as well. The Annihilation Legion enhancements, we have Eternal Madness, Necron model only. In the fight phase, each time a model in the bearer's unit is destroyed, if that model has not fought this phase, roll a d6. On a 4+, do not remove the destroyed model from play. It can fight after the attacking model's unit has finished making its attacks and is then removed from play. In grade superiority, Necron model only, each time a model in the bearer's unit makes an attack on a critical wound, improve armor penetration characteristic of that unit by 1. Soulless Reaper, Destroyer Cult model only. Each time an enemy unit within engagement range of the bearer's unit is selected to fall back, roll a d6. On a 3+, that unit cannot fall back this phase and must remain stationary. And then we have Eldritch Nightmare, which is Destroyer Cult model only. At the start of the fight phase, each enemy unit within engagement range of the bearer must take a battle shock test. So I'm not a big fan of the, you get to die and then fight afterwards. It'd be handy against other melee forces, but frankly, I prefer, say, fight first. That'd be a much more better defense, really make your opponent think about having to charge you like that. Ingrained superiority, if it's cheap, then great. I just wish it was a bit more than just +1 AP. Even for more points, perhaps if you did it so that on a successful charge, all your armor penetristics go up by 1 for melee weapons. That I feel would be more inclined towards the detachment rule, which is about charging. Soulless Reaper, excellent when it works, but could be devastating, in terms of, I think this is probably the one I would go for more than any of them, because if you manage to hold back a key unit from being able to get away, kind of protects your unit as well, so that'd be very, very handy. And then Eldritch Nightmare, if it works, I suppose it can switch off stratagem or for maybe hold an objective because you're going to reduce the obsec of units to 0. is relying on taking Battleshock tests for your opponent. I'm not the biggest fan when it comes to Battleshock tests. I have seen it useful, I've seen it not useful. Generally, not so impressed with these enhancements as compared to the previous ones. But there is also, I do think the Soulless Reaper one is a very good one to consider. On to the stratagems, we have Mask of Death for 1 command point, strategic ploy stratagem, using your opponent's shooting phase or fight phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. And this on 1 Destroyer, Cult or Flayed One unit from your army that was selected as the target of one of those attacks. Till the end of the phase, each time an attack targets that unit, subtract 1 from the hit roll. And then we have Spur of Frailty, which is 1 command point battle tactic stratagem, using the shooting phase or fight phase, and use it on 1 Destroyer, Cult or Flayed One unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot or fight this phase. Till the end of the phase, each time model from your unit makes an attack that targets a unit below its starting strength, add 1 to the hit roll. If the target is below half strength, add 1 to the wound roll as well. So both these quite useful, especially for their cost. -1 in the shooting or fight phase will help for survivability, and the Spur of Frailty, reliable way to get more accurate hits or even wounds. I think that is quite good for 1 command point. Murderous Reanimation for 1 command point, which is a battle tactic stratagem, using the fight phase, and it's when 1 Destroyer, Cult or Flayed One unit from your army that has just destroyed an enemy unit, or just caused an enemy unit that was not below half strength to become half strength, your unit can reanimate. And then we have Pitless Hunters, which is 1 command point. Battle tactic stratagem, using the fight phase, 1 Destroyer, Cult or Flayed One unit from your army that has not been selected to fight this phase. To the end of the phase, each time model in your unit makes pile-in move or a consolidate move, it can move up to 6 inches instead of 3. So the Murderous Reanimation, a bit more situational. I would have liked it if you'd been able to do this as ranged as well. Again, trying to think of the ranged part of the Destroyers. And Pitless Hunters allows you to consolidate an extra 3 inches. Situational, but when it does work, it is extremely useful. Blood-Fueled Cruelty for 1 command point, battle tactic stratagem. Using your opponent's movement phase just after an enemy unit ends a fallback move. 1 Destroyer, Cult or Flayed One unit from your army that started the phase within engagement range of that enemy unit. Roll a d6, 2 to 5, enemy unit suffers d3 mortal wounds, and on a 6 they suffer 3 mortal wounds. Then you can make a normal move, and it must move as close as possible to the enemy unit. Then Insanity's Ire, 1 command point, and that's strategic ploy stratagem, using your opponent's shooting phase just after an enemy unit is shot. Use this on 1 Destroyer, Cult or Flayed One unit from your army that has 1 or more of its models destroyed. An attacking unit's attack. The unit can make a normal move, but it must end that move as close as possible to the enemy unit. So I'd say for the Blood-Fueled Cruelty, damage fine. More importantly is the movement pressure, and again, Insanity's Ire, the extra move, really good. Can mean that suddenly you are much closer to your opponent than they expected, making the next turn charge a lot more possible, possibly even to contest objectives. On to the Canoptek Court, and its detachment rule is Power Matrix. So certain areas of the battlefield are considered to be within your army's power matrix as following. Your deployment zone is always within your army's power matrix. At the start of any phase, if you control at least half of the objective markers within No Man's Land, till the end of the phase, No Man's Land is within your power matrix. And at the start of any phase, if you control at least half of the objective markers within your opponent's deployment zone, to the end of the phase, your opponent's deployment zone is considered to be within your army's power matrix. Each time model in a Cryptic or Canoptek unit from your army makes an attack, reroll hit roll of 1. If such a unit is wholly within your army's power matrix, you can reroll the hit roll instead. The units affected by this are Illuminor Szeras, Orikan The Diviner, Technomancer, Psychomancer, Chronomancer, Plasmancer, Canoptek Reanimator, Canoptek Scarab Swarms, Canoptek Spyders, Canoptek Wraiths, Canoptek Doomstalker. So that's probably one of the most interesting detachment abilities I've seen. You get a standard ability, which is quite good, reroll hit rolls of 1, but you also get something more if you play and solve this detachment rule. That is by controlling the objective markers, which we kind of really want to do in 10th edition or just about any 4K game. So I'm interested to see if the keyword carries over to the unit, so your Cryptic joins a unit of warriors or mortals, do they get it? I would argue yeah, because I think we had the ability where if infantry joined monster units it caused a little bit of difficulty there. Generally the keyword carries over, so I think it should work on that side as well. I'd be interested to hear what people say on that. But really cool ability, really like it. Enhancements for the Canoptek Court, and we have Dimensional Sanctum. Cryptek model only, models in the bearer's unit have the Infiltrator's ability. Hyperphasic Fulcrum, Cryptek model only, while the bearer is leading unit, if that unit is wholly within your army's power matrix. Each time model in that unit makes an attack, reroll wound rolls of 1. Auto Divinator, Cryptek model only, each time your opponent gains a command point as a result of an ability, roll a d6 on a 2+, you gain a command point. Melodramal Tesla Weave, Cryptek model only, once per phase when an enemy unit selects the bearer's unit as a target of a charge. Roll a d6, on a 2 to 5 the enemy unit suffers d3 mortal wounds, on a 6 that enemy unit suffers 3 mortal wounds. So when it comes to them, Dimensional Sanctum I really like, put it on Technomancer with Canoptek Wraiths and prepare for some early turn charges. Hyperphasic Fulcrum, a bit restrictive that the whole unit needs to be in the power matrix area. However, the ability to reroll all your hits because you'll be within your power matrix, but also wound rolls of 1 is very powerful. Auto Divinator, generating command points is always useful, but it would be useless if your opponent wasn't planning to gain command points, so a bit of a risk on that side as well, but I do think that is kind of useful. And Dimensional Sanctum, an okay defense ability, but it is only a few mortal wounds, so that can't help. That can help, but it is a bit more restrictive on that side. You do have to be charged to do so, but you never know, you might get those wounds off. And for the stratagems, we have Curse of the Cryptek, which is 1 command point, it's a battle tactic stratagem. Using your opponent's shooting phase or fight phase just after an enemy unit has shot or fought. When you target 1 Cryptek model from your army that was destroyed by one of the attacking unit's attacks, you can use the stratagem on that model even though it was just destroyed. To the end of the battle, each time a friendly Canoptek model makes an attack that targets the attacking unit, add 1 to hit rolls and add 1 to wound rolls. And Cynosure of Eradication, sure. 2 command points, battle tactic stratagem. When to use it? The start of the shooting phase or start of the fight phase. Targets 1 Cryptek or Canoptek unit from your army that's wholly within your army's power matrix. To the end of the phase, weapons equipped by models in that unit have the Devastating Wounds ability. So Curse of the Cryptek, nice bonus, but I'm not a fan of having to lose a unit, let alone a character, but can be a good way to maybe bring down a key unit. And Cynosure of Eradication, not bad, but sadly I couldn't really find any combos to do any bring anti-anything to maximise this. There might be something I'm missing there, so have a look throughout the codex here when I show you a few more things. But certainly if you're managed to give a unit Devastating Wounds, could be really good. It's any way to cause Devastating Wounds on higher abilities such as 5s, might work as well. But I really couldn't find the anti, something that I was looking for there. Solar Pulse for 1 command point, Strategic Ploy Stratagem, used at the start of the shooting phase and targets 1 Cryptek model from your army. Select 1 objective marker within 18 inches of your Cryptek model. To the end of the phase, weapons equipped by friendly Necron models have Ignore Cover ability, while targeting units within range of the objective marker. And Reactive Subroutines, which is 1 command point, Strategic Ploy Stratagem. Use it when your opponent's movement phase, just after an enemy unit ends a normal, advance or fell back move. 1 Canoptek unit from your army that is within 9 inches of the enemy unit is the target. And the effect is you can make a normal move up to 6 inches with that unit. So Solar Pulse is a little bit of a stipulations on that one, but it's worth it because multiple units can benefit. And the reactive subroutines, affordable stratagem to get that extra movement, prepare for a charge and keep the pressure on your opponent. Counter Temporal Shift, which is 1 command point, Strategic Ploy Stratagem. Using your opponent's shooting phase just after an enemy unit has selected its target. Target 1 Cryptek unit from your army that was selected as the target of 1 or more of the attacking unit's attacks. Till the end of the phase, your unit can only be selected as the target of a ranged attack if the attacking model is within 12 inches. And Suboptimal Facade, which is 1 command point, a Strategic Ploy Stratagem. Using your opponent's charge phase just after an enemy unit has declared a charge. The target is 1 Canoptek unit from your army that was selected as a target of that charge and is wholly within your army's power matrix. That unit can reanimate. So I think the first one, Counter Temporal Shift, really good for 1 command point to redirect firepower. Opponent's trying to really whittle down a key unit or move you from an objective, you can deny them, which is quite good. And then suboptimal Facade, odd way to reanimate, but certainly one to make your opponent think about charging. Bring back a few units there, will be quite useful. Next we have the Obeisance Phalanx, which their detachment rule is Worthy Foe. In your command phase, select one enemy unit until the start of your next command phase. Each time an Overlord, Lichguard or Triarch unit from your army makes an attack that targets that unit, add 1 to the wound roll. Units affected are Overlords with Translocation Shroud, Overlord, Lichguard, Triarch Praetorians, Triarch Stalker. So it's a trickier one to pull off. Many of these units favour combat, so getting maximum efficiency might be difficult. But I suppose if you do join units, then they would get the Overlord keywords or that unit, so then that might help there. Interesting that it appears that epic heroes don't get this, so things like Imotekh doesn't, which I think is a bit odd. It seemed like one that would be fit to go in, but he does not have the Overlord keyword, so he would not benefit as far as I can tell. Obeisance Phalanx enhancements, we have Honourable Combatant, which is for Overlord model only. Each time the bearer's unit destroys an enemy character unit, your opponent loses a command point if they have any. Unflinching Will, Overlord model only. The bearer's melee weapons have precision and anti-infantry 5+. And Overlord model only, each time a melee attack targets the bearer's unit, subtract 1 from the hit roll. And Eternal Conqueror, Overlord model only, each time a model in the bearer's unit makes an attack that targets an enemy unit within range of an objective marker, you can reroll the hit roll. So Honourable Combatant, very situational at best. Opponent might spend all their command points beforehand, and you also have to destroy an enemy character. Many times that does work, but yeah, it does need to be within the Overlord's unit as well, so it's a bit trickier to pull off. Unflinching Will, very good targeting characters and easier dev wounds as well, which is really good for Overlords. Warrior Noble, native -1 is always good, very good in combat. And Eternal Conqueror, reroll to it is good, albeit likely might see this in your combat units, but I suppose it can work for ranged ones as well, as it just needs to be with the Overlord model, and the opponent needs to be in range of an objective marker. So I think with these ones, there's actually some really good ones there as well. I really do like them. Not so much the Honourable Combatant, I'm not so sure on that one. I think there's many ways your opponent could play around with that one. But yeah, generally quite good. On to the stratagems, and you have your Time is Nigh for 1 command point and is an epic deed stratagem. Any phase just after your opponent's Warlord is destroyed, your Necron's Warlord, until the end of the battle, each time an enemy unit takes a battle shock or leadership test, is subtract 1 from the result. And Enslaved Artifice, 1 command point, it's a battle tactic stratagem. Your shooting phase or the fight phase, 1 Necron unit from your army, excluding Titanic units, has not been selected to shoot or fight this phase. Till the end of the phase, each time a model in your unit makes an attack, an unmodified hit roll of 5 scores a critical hit. So for your Time is Nigh, great stratagem for 1 command point to affect opponent's units for the rest of the battle. And Enslaved Artifice, also great. Necrons have a lot of lethal hits, some devastating wounds, etc. So there is quite a few nice combinations that will really help here if you do plan to use this one quite well. So really bit like both these stratagems. I do like as well that Enslaved Artifice doesn't target, say in the past we had like Canoptek unit or Destroyer unit, that can be used in just about any of them, so excluding Titanic units, so I do like the bit of variety there. Nano Assembly Protocols for 1 command point, battle tactic stratagem. Using your opponent's shooting phase or fight phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. Targets 1 Necron vehicle unit from your army that was selected as the target of 1 or more of the attacking unit's attacks. To the end of the phase, each time an attack is allocated to a model in your unit, subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of that ability. Sentinels of Eternity, 1 command point, epic deed stratagem. Using the fight phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. This to be used on 1 Lichguard or Triarch Praetorian unit from your army that was selected as the target of 1 or more of the attacking unit's attacks. To the end of the phase, each time a model in that unit is destroyed, if that model is not fought, and they're 4+, don't remove it. That model can attack at the end of the fight phase. Well, at the end of at the end when the unit has finished making its attacks, then you remove it from play. I suppose the Nano one, very good for things like Tesseract Vault. Huge amount of attacks might go towards it. It does have an invul save. And Sentinels, I'm not a big fan of the fight after death sort of rules, but for 1 command point that's not bad. Get into an unfavourable attack, someone charges you, might be able to get a bunch of attacks back onto your opponent. Suffer no rival for 1 command point. It's a battle tactic stratagem using the fight phase. Targets 1 Lich Guard or Triarch unit from your army that has not been selected to fight this phase. To the end of the phase, melee weapons equipped by models in that unit have the Precision ability. Territorial Obsession for 1 command point. It's a strategic ploy stratagem. Using your command phase, 1 Lich Guard or Triarch Praetorian unit from your army. To the start of your next command phase, add 1 to the objective control characteristics of models in that unit. If the unit has the vehicle keyword, add 3 to the objective characteristic instead. Really suffer no rival. If you've got Assassinate, this would be an exceptional way to really target down a character. If you might not be able to take out the unit, at least you can take out the character. And Territorial Obsession, situational but also extremely useful when it works. Just a very good way to possibly score extra points. And finally we have Hypercrypt Legion, and the detachment rule is hyperphasing. At the end of your opponent's turn, you can select a number of Necron units from your army, excluding units that are within engagement range of 1 or more enemy units. The maximum number of units you can select depend on the battle size. So incursions, it's up to 2 units, strike force it's 3, and onslaught is 4. Once you've made your selections, remove these units from the battlefield and place them in strategic reserve. So the key difference is that you are going in strategic reserve. You're not like Grey Knights who then essentially come in reserve and they deploy 9 inches away from your from one of your enemies essentially, or anywhere on the battlefield, so that's more than 9 inches away. And if you don't have the deep strike rule or something similar, you're going to be probably coming in on a board edge. I can see plenty of strategic use for this. You do need to plan a little bit around it to get some use. Monolith does help here as well potentially. But yeah, some quite a good one if you're going to play with mobility quite a lot and you have used units that are going to get the maximum effect of this. Hypercrypt Legion enhancements, we've got Dimensional Overseer, Necron model only, while the bearers on the battlefield or in strategic reserve, add 1 to the number of units from your army that you can select for hyperphasing rule. Arisen Tyrant, Necron model only, each time model in the bearer's unit makes an attack, reroll a hit roll of 1. The bearer's unit was set up on the battlefield this turn, you can reroll a hit roll instead. Hyperspatial Transfer Node, Necron model only, each time the bearer unit advances, do not make an advance roll for it. Instead, until the end of the phase, add 6 to the move characteristic of models in the bearer's unit. Osteoclave Fulcrum, which is Necron model only, models in the bearer's unit have the deep strike ability. So Dimension Overseer, this is okay, probably depends on how many units you're fielding. It's fine, but I don't really see it as a must take. Arisen Tyrant, native rerolls of 1 is always good, and a bonus if you are using abilities similar to Detachment, great. Hyperspatial Transfer Node, helpful for character units if they plan to advance, charge, or with assault weapons, so that can be really handy there. Simply just to be able to get you a bit more, across the field. And then Osteoclave Fulcrum, almost a must take for this detachment if fully utilising this ability. On to our stratagems here, and we have Hyperphasic Recall for 2 command point, strategic ploy stratagem. Using your opponent's shooting phase or fight phase just after an enemy unit has shot or fought. Target is 1 Necron infantry unit from your army that has 1 or more of its models destroyed as a result of the attacking unit's attacks, and 1 friendly monolith model. Remove your infantry unit from the battlefield and then set up back anywhere on the battlefield that's wholly within 6 inches of your monolith model, not within engagement range of 1 or more enemy models. And units. And Quantum Deflection, 1 command point, Wargear stratagem. When your opponent's shooting phase or the fight phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets, and 1 Necron vehicle unit from your army that was selected as the target of 1 or more of the attacking unit's attacks. At the end of the phase, models in that unit have a 4+ invul save. So Hyperphasic Recall is a little bit expensive, but really good for a redeploy, and you can get out of engagement range. For that one, as far as I can see, there's nothing to stop you from recalling out of engagement range, so quite good. So if you manage to get some damage on you, maybe they were getting multi-charged, get out of there. And we've got Quantum Deflection, which plenty of Necron vehicles do have invuls, 4-up invuls, but the Monolith does not, so it seems like this was natively sort of made specifically for the Monolith to give it a little bit more survivability. Reanimation Crypts for 1 command point, and it's strategic ploy stratagem, using your command phase, and your target is your Necron's Warlord. For each of your Necron unit in reserves, that reserves unit reanimates protocol activates. And Cosmic Precision, which is 1 command point, strategic ploy stratagem, using your movement phase, 1 Necron unit from your army that is reviving using deep strike or hyperphasing abilities that phase. Unit can be set up anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 3 inches horizontally away from enemy models. So restrictions on that one is a unit targeted with this stratagem is not eligible to declare a charge in the same turn. Reanimation crits could be good. If you're withdrawing damaged units, then you'd be able to reanimate them. It helps up with the detachment ability. Interesting, it has to be the target of your Necron Warlord, so that would kind of suggest they need to probably be on the battlefield to target them and then allow the reserves to reanimate. And then Cosmic Precision, very good stratagem. Get to places where your opponents try to screen or keep things out of line of sight. Pop up behind them really close, possibly just rapid fire and put a lot of shots into them. I've played a few times when it's Space Marines and they have the, I want to say the Inceptors, the ones that can deep strike 3 inches away, and then they just usually put plasma and bolt shots in. Similar idea, really like it to get into those areas that you can't see, so really good stratagem, especially for its cost. Dimensional Corridor for 2 command points, Strategic Ploy Stratagem. Using your charge phase, 1 Necron unit from your army that was set up in the battlefield this turn using the Eternity Gate ability, a monolith model that started the turn on the battlefield, and your unit is eligible to charge from this in this phase. And Entropic Dampening, which is 1 command point, it's a war gear stratagem. Using your opponent's shooting phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. Target is 1 Titanic model from your army that was selected as the target of 1 or more of the attacking unit's attacks, is within 18 inches of the attacking unit. So the effect would be that until the end of the phase, weapons equipped by models in the attacking unit have the hazardous ability. So Dimensional Corridor, expensive but absolutely worth it. You know, you are able to get really close to your opponent using the Eternity Gate. You can go for that 9 inches. Something you can't do with things like Deep Strike, etc. So really good way to really get in there. So potentially really good charge. And Entropic Dampening, I'm a bit of a mixed bag in this one. If your opponent's putting in a high volume amount of shots or weapons going into you, then yeah, that can be good. If it's a low amount, then probably not so. Before we go into the datasheet, it's just going to give an overall thoughts when it comes to detachments. So Awakened Dynasty I think is really quite good. You are limited that you do have to bring a leader, but generally if the leaders are good you do want to bring them anyway. Enhancements and stratagems are also very good. I think there's a good incentive you get your initial rule of stratagems and then incentive for having a leader. Really like that you get rewarded for following the detachment rule. Enhancements highlights, I like Veil of Darkness, Phasal Subjugator and Netherrealm Casket. I think all of them are pretty good. Even the Imotekh Dermal Bond is quite good as well, but generally those would be kind of my 3 go-to there. And in terms of stratagems, I am sort of really liking Protocol of Eternal Revenant, Protocol of Sudden Storm, and Protocol of Conquering Tyrant. I think they all find their uses there. They do also have some rewards if you bring a leader into the unit, you get a further bonus, that's really good. Really like it when you are bringing that sort of synergy between the detachment rule and also abiding by it to get some extra abilities. Then we have Annihilation Protocol, so I think the detachment rule is fine. I'm not happy there's no reward really for ranged destroyers. I wish there's maybe something there. I don't know. Give them pistol. I'm not entirely sure what you should have there. Maybe they get +1. I'm not sure. They should get something that really rewards the destroyer side. I get that this is more going down the combat side focus when it comes to destroyers. But I feel that if you are going to have destroyers as a main part of it, have also the ranged part get a bit of a bonus there as well. Enhancements are not as useful, however the stratagems I do have plenty of use of. The only enhancement I saw was the Soulless Reaper. I thought was particularly really of note. Let me know if there's maybe I'm getting something wrong there. If I was to criticise anything, Ingrained Superiority I feel should have just been, if you made a charge you get +1 to your Armour Penetristic. And I suppose Eternal Manus is not bad as well for a defensive enhancement as well. And then we also have for them the sort of stratagems I really like. Massive Death I think is really good. Spore of Frailty will help a lot, it's certainly to up the damage, and Senti's Ire for a bit of mobility there as well, just to put some pressure on your opponent. And looking at Canoptek Court, I think this is one of the coolest detachments I've ever seen in terms of mechanics. You do have an overall buff that helps you, but then a better one if you manage to take more of the board. I think that's really cool, just generally love how it works. I hope to maybe see that ability maybe play out in other ways in other codexes, because I just think it's a really cool one that really plays quite well and just mechanically is awesome. Enhancements and stratagems are generally pretty good. I can see some use for a few of them there. The highlights I see in terms of enhancements, the Dimensional Sanctum giving you Infiltrators rule. That'd be really one of my auto takes for that one. I just think having the infiltrate with maybe some wraiths would put some good initial pressure on your opponent. And then you also have the Hyperphasic Fulcrum, which is allowing you to get the reroll wound rolls of 1, which just adds quite a bit of damage, which is quite good. We also have, for key stratagems I really like, is the Sinentia of Eradication. So it can give you the devastating wound ability. That is going to be really good. You know, there'll be a few units that will benefit from that, just to add a lot of pressure onto your opponent. You have Solar Pulse, which is rare to have such a kind of army-wide rule. It's a debuff on one particular unit, but to get through the cover part is quite important. So it'll allow you to pressure in case your opponent's hiding something behind cover or benefiting from it. Then you'll be able to reduce that efficiency, so that's quite good, especially for its cost. We also have reactive subroutines, which I think is a good way to get extra movement, put pressure on your opponent. And then counter temporal shift, which again is a good way for you to detract your opponent from being able to shoot a key unit. It's maybe far away from, say, they're going to get there on objective, your opponent has a long-ranged unit that's going to target it. Good way to get a bit of survivability there. And Obeisance Phalanx. This one I think the rule is fine. I just wish there was maybe a further reward if there was a leader attached to the target unit. So it's you know, if your opponent has a leader, then you're going to get possibly reroll all wounds. That might be a little bit step too far, but you are just choosing one unit to really get this ability onto. So I just think having that a little bit of reward would have been really nice. General enhancement stratagems are pretty good, especially back to the stratagems that benefit other units that are not so much detachment focused. So they're not just targeting Overlord units, Lich Guard and Triarchs. In terms of enhancements I like Unflinching Will, just to give your Overlord precision and anti-infantry 5+. It'll help you get those devastating wounds off, and precision in case you do decide to get into a duel with another leader, then you'll just be able to take them out, which will be quite nice, or at least do some damage. And then we've also got Warrior Noble, which is in melee, essentially you have -1 to hit. Again, quite nice on that one. Really would like to have just -1 to hit natively, so it works in range as well, but I get it, it's part of the stratagem, the enhancement. An Eternal Conqueror, that one is really good as well. If you are going to be contesting an objective, then you're going to get reroll hits and just make you that bit more accurate. And in terms of stratagems, I like Enslaved's Artifice, just being able to get that extra crit roll or crit hits on 5s. There's plenty of units that would benefit from that. Nano Scarab Assembly, which will help keep your vehicles alive. I think that was a very, very key one there. As far as I can see, there's nothing, essentially that'll reduce damage quite a wee bit, because Necrons do have a few good key vehicles, mainly Doomsday Arc is a solid go-to in some ways. And then we also have, for that one as well, Suffer No Rival, which gives your Lich Guard Triarch unit precision, which if you are playing Assassinate, I think that'll be absolutely key to take out some leader units. And then we have the Hypercrypt Legion, which the detachment rule is interesting. I feel you need to gear towards it. If it gave everyone native Deep Strike, or when they went into Hypercrypt they could Deep Strike, this would be amazing. But you do need to gear around it to make sure you are getting the most benefits from it. Obviously bringing some monoliths as well will probably help quite extensively as well. Enhancements for this one are fine, but the stratagems are pretty good that do benefit movement with the detachment, which is quite good. And it does help survivability for monoliths or other vehicles. And in terms of enhancement highlights, Arisen Tyrant is one I quite like, just being able to have the chance to reroll hit, and it's reroll all hits if you come in from set up in the battlefield this turn. So again, playing towards the detachment rule, really, really like. Osteoclave Fulcrum gives a Necron unit Deep Strike, I feel is absolutely a must take if you do decide to go down the route of this detachment, because having that Deep Strike will certainly give you a bit more choice. And then strategic highlights, we've got the Hyperphasic Recall. I think it's really good if you've got a monolith to get something out of dodge. As far as I can tell, you can do this even if you're in engagement range, so it's once an opponent fights, you just get out of dodge. I think that's going to be quite good, you just need to survive the combat. We've also got Quantum Deflection, which will help keep one of your vehicles alive, giving it 4-up invul. Looking at the monolith on that one there. We've also got Cosmic Precision, which will allow you to Deep Strike certainly into a much more, or Hyperphasing ability into a lot more accurate area, really put pressure on some units that your opponents tried to screen. And then you also have Dimensional Corridor, which allows you to charge straight out of the Eternity Gate, which I think is going to be absolutely vital when it comes to to units coming out of the Monolith, just giving you that option to really get a close-up charge to your enemy. As we get started with data sheets, we might as well start with the Silent King. So I've got a list of all these stats and everything up here. Now, a lot of these appear to be mostly the same. There is a tick of extra movement on him going up from 7 to 8, but in regard to other things, more or less a lot of them do appear to be quite similar. There are a few differences in his rules though. We do have the Pharaohs the Stars. It now allows you to reroll all hit rolls and wound rolls of 1. I think in the past it used to be only ranged attacks. And then his aura for Pharaoh of the Blades allows you to reroll charge, but also each time model in that unit makes a melee attack, they get +1 to their strength. And the Bringer of Unity does appear to be more or less the same in that one as well, where you are going to be ignoring modifiers. And then his Silent King ability, which used to be at the end of your command phase, you can select a Necron unit to unbattle shock, is now just 6-inch aura that allows him to add 1 to their leadership. So in that regard, I'd probably say he's a little bit better in that it's no longer just the ranged attacks that get to reroll hit and wound. If he is going to be in combat with units, they're going to largely benefit from it as well. So in a lot of regards, I suppose if you liked the Silent King before, you are going to still like him, because he seems to be doing a lot of what he did beforehand, just a little bit better in some regards. Next up we have Imotekh with his shiny new model, and again there's actually not that much differences between him and his old rules. Main one I can see here is that he's got an extra wound, which is greatly welcomed. I would say that the greatest thing about Imotekh now is that the Overlords are probably not as useful as they used to be. I suppose he was greatly useful due to the fact that he gave you an extra command point, but he was very, very overshadowed. The Lord of Storms is useful, but because it's 12 inches, it's going to be situational where you can get multiple units around you. Then it could potentially be very, very good. But it's really going to define really sort of what his point cost is going to be and how useful Overlords are going to be. Certainly if you've got the abilities where you are going to get in +1 for having a leader in your unit, then he's going to be useful there, and adding the extra command point. Now it just really depends on how much we still value Overlords. Illuminor Szeras next, and again largely the same there. I really do like his stats and some of his abilities here. Some notable differences that we do have is that his mechanical augmentation is now down to 3 inches rather than 6 inches. Now I don't think that's the biggest problem in the world, because he did want to be within 3 inches, so he got his lone operative words. And I suppose the extra inch of movement as well came out of nowhere, but is a welcome addition as well. But yeah, I do like Illuminor Szeras. I do like the mechanical augmentation ability. It's not one I've used because to use it quite properly, I think there has to be a large investment in order to get the most out of him. But generally, still quite a solid unit. If you're going to build around him, it's a big point investment, but you can add quite a lot to his force. Trazyn The Infinite. I might pronounce his name wrong in there. But one of our favourite Warhammer characters, I suppose. The lore greatly exceeds his character here. Again, we're not going to see much differences between his character. Yes, it's nice to have the sticky objectives from his Ancient Collector, but really, again, I'm struggling to see in which ways you can justify him. I would love to say that he's had a massive glow up and he's going to find a lot of use, but I just don't see that being the way when largely he is going to be working the exact same as he did before. And now we have a unit that was kind of a standout for the Necrons beforehand, and is Orikan The Diviner. A solid unit, mainly for some of his abilities, so he again is largely the same. He is only attaching to Immortals and Necron Warriors, so he's not joining Lichguard anymore. I don't think they particularly needed him to come along as such, because he still has his 4-up invul for that unit, which is really, really good. And when the stars are right, he can basically triple his attack and strength characteristics, and all successive wounds are critical wounds, which is, well, that can be really devastating in the right call. So yeah, still an absolute solid unit if you want to get a little bit more survivability, and then in one turn you can possibly get a whole bunch of mortal wounds off. Onto a new unit, we have the Overlord with Translocation Shroud. So in terms of movements, we have movement 5, toughness 5, wounds 6, leadership 6, obsec 1, save 2+, invul 4+. There's an Overlord's Blade for melee, attack 4, web skill 2+, strength 8, AP -3, damage 2, and devastating wounds. Now we come to the change in Resurrection Orb. So once per battle, while the Spyder's leading unit, at the end of any phase, it can resurrect that unit if it's on the battlefield. When you do, that unit reanimates D6 instead of D3. It can only be done once per phase. So yeah, that's a bit of a change. Attached units are Immortals, Necron Warriors, and Lich Guards, and has reanimation protocols. What will be done once per battle round, one unit from your army with this ability can be targeted with stratagem for 0 command points, even if you've already targeted a different unit with that stratagem this phase. Translocation Shroud. Each time this unit makes an advance roll, do not make an advance roll. Instead, they can make a move of add 6 to their movement characteristics models in that unit. In addition, each time model in that unit makes a normal advance or fallback move until the move is finished, it can move horizontally through models and terrain features. It cannot finish a move on top of another model or its base. So my thoughts, so if you've got Awakened Dynasty's Protocol Sunstorm, this could be useful because then you get to assault and it'll be even quicker. Sadly, I can't find a way to advance and charge. That'd be absolutely awesome. That'd be really handy and really push this Overlord into a bit more of a higher consideration other than being an absolute fantastic model. I suppose we'll go into the Resurrection Orb. Yeah, that's a big change there. That's really going to influence the sort of usefulnesses of Overlords going forward. It is really handy to still D6 wounds. On average, you're still looking at 3 there, and it's only once per battle. So I think that's going to be a big hit for a lot of Necron players who did use Overlords for the Resurrection Orbs. Yeah, at least they'll still be able to resurrect, and it'll still offer some use, but it's not going to be as reliable as it once was. On to just the regular Overlord next, and I would say there's not huge differences here, more or less everything's the same, bar of course the Resurrection Orb, which we've kind of covered already. Again, it's the once per battle, and you reanimate D6 instead of D3. Big difference there. Now, I still think my Will Be Done is hugely useful. Now, it is once per battle round, so having so many Overlords may not be as useful as it once was before, because, simply put, they are not going to benefit as much from the Resurrection Orb, but it is still very useful. So you may still find people are going to use them quite often. Simply put, yeah, bit of a difference in there. I don't know how I do like the Overlord's Blade. I really think that having that with the enhancement that allows you to have precision and anti-infantry 5+, really to give you a better chance on making some unsavable saves with the devastating wounds would be nice. The Void Scythe having Dam 3 and Strength 12 is also useful as well. Yeah, big change for the Overlords, big change when it comes to Resurrection in general for the Necrons. Catacomb Command Barge next, and again, largely the same. It does have an extra inch of movement, which, fine, but that Resurrection Orb change is impacting a wee bit as well. Ultimately, when it comes to Catacomb Command Barge, it is targetable, which really ruins a little bit its use, that it will be just targeted down possibly. But yeah, the problem with a lot of Necron parts is that they do have so many, amount of leaders that they can attach to units and things, making more viable for points. So again, I don't think the Catacomb Command Barge was in high use beforehand, and it may struggle as well going forward. I do think the objective control buff is nice, but I just think there's other leader abilities that far exceed it. We have the Skorpekh Lord next, and it does have an extra inch of movement. I don't know where all these extra inch of movements have came from, but it seems to be the area they want to increase a little bit. So, in terms of the Skorpekh Lord, it is largely the same as before. Not too many differences. I would probably say, in order to justify him, you're going to look at what the uses are for Skorpekh Destroyers in general, to see if they are quite as useful as they were before. Now, Skorpekh Destroyers weren't as popular before in the indexes, but with the new Destroyer rules and some of the enhancements and some of the stratagems that may be available to them are useful, there may actually be some combinations to make them useful. But again, it'll be all trying to combine all our new resources to see if they can push ahead. Because after all, again, the Skorpekh Lord is going to be largely useful because of the unit he joins, and that will decide him, and we'll go into the Skorpekh Destroyers later on. Lokhust Lord, and again, very much the same on that side. Now, Lokhust Lord was actually not a bad unit because he did buff this sort of ranged destroyers. So you're looking at your Lokhust Destroyers and Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, and the Heavy Destroyers were quite popular in some ways as well. That boosting of the 5+ to critical is very useful in and itself, so joining either of the destroyers will find use, though the heaviers were more favoured. And certainly with some of the new enhancements and stratagems, I think we might see some more use for them going forward. So Lokhust Lord I could certainly see in consideration if you are going to be using heavy destroyers. And we have the Royal Warden next. Now the Royal Warden is largely the same, though the adaptive strategy has changed quite significantly here. And it's no longer gives the unit heavy and assault rule, is that they can shoot and declare charge in turn which they fell back. Now, I think in some regard that will be more useful, in some regard it won't be. It just means if you are going to be contesting objectives or in unfavourable areas that you may have large blobs of warriors or say immortals, then having that ability to get out of there and then fire back is going to be quite helpful with Royal Warden. Whereas before you could, mainly on the advanced side, you could advance onto an objective and maybe do a secondary objective. So again, I think points will decide this character here. We are looking at what the unit can do, well in combat I guess, but also the ability they bring. And again, Necrons just have so many leaders with abilities that it can be quite difficult to justify them when you do have ones with such high important abilities themselves. On to a popular unit, that is the Technomancer. So the Technomancer has changed a little bit here. Now the main one is, it of course cannot join Lichguard anymore, which is quite the change for them, as there was the popular sort of Lichguard blob. They are now native 10-inch movement, but they did lose their ability to have the Canoptek control nod, so there's no longer the adding to hit, which is not as ideal. Still retaining the 5-up feel no pain ability onto the unit, which is massively helpful. So it has changed quite a wee bit. You know, joining Immortals, Necron Warriors and Canoptek Wraiths moved it around a wee bit. In some regards, depending what you think of Canoptek Wraiths, might be a good unit to join across with them. Certainly if you give it the enhancement to give it infiltration, having this, the Technomancer and Canoptek Wraiths right in your opponent's lines very, very quickly or on objectives. Certainly they've got the 4-up invul, has 5-up feel no pain. Could make quite a difficult unit to shift, so some to consider there. But yeah, not being part of Lichguard anymore is quite the change. On to the Psychomancer, and it has had a bit of a change up here. Now whether that change up is massive will be up for debate. So again, it is about fear bombing your opponent. The main abilities have changed, that the Nightmare Shroud aura ability in the Battle Shock step of your opponent's command phase, if an enemy unit is below starting strength is within 6 inches of this model, the enemy unit must take a Battle Shock test with -1 to the test, and also once per turn at the start of your command movement, shooting, charge or fight phase, you can select one enemy unit within 18 inches of this model. That unit must take a Battle Shock test with -1 from the test. So a big improvement in that one in terms of what you can actually do. It's now you can do it in different phases, and it's a bit more just forcing Battle Shock tests. Can be useful, but again, I'm not quite sold on Battle Shock. When it comes to all the Cryptex, this is the one I'm sort of least sold on to a degree. Fantastic model, but again, it depends on how useful you're going to find your Battle Shock tests and trying to get your opponent to fail them. The Chronomancer has once again really not changed at all. Still perfectly usable and still really good. It does have that -1 to hit, which is very, very good for keeping models alive. Probably a bit better on 1 wound models than say 5-up feel no pain, debatably. Mainly because obviously if you have feel no pain on multiple wound units, that's more useful than single wound ones. The extra movement ability would also be helpful getting units onto objectives or getting out of line of sight, etc. So again, Chronomancer, I really like it as a Cryptek model. I think it is quite useful, and also I think it is a fantastic model as well. So yeah, another okay one, certainly in the Cryptex, certainly up there as well. And of the last Cryptex, we have the Plasmancer. So again, hasn't changed too much, though there is a few key changes here. Living Lightning has changed that. In the shooting phase, select one enemy unit within 18 inches and visible to this model. Roll 4d6. On a 4+, that enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound. Now, I still think a very good unit itself. You are exchanging survivability for damage. Now, I think the sort of Living Lightning has improved that if you're targeting units with 12 models or less, you're not going to get as much payoff as you would find now. So targeting small units, yeah, this will actually give you a bit more mortal wounds, along with its Plasmic Lance, which is also not bad, doing some damage on top of it as well. We now have the C'tan Shard of the Deceiver. So it's actually gone down a movement, which is very different to what the rest of the army seems to be seeing with that 1 extra movement in some areas. Now, it does have now the 5-up Feel No Pain, which is very, very helpful for the Deceiver. Now, in general, I just feel that if you aren't planning to use the Grand Illusion as much, then there are other better C'tan choices to choose from. If the Cosmic Insanity had been 2 damage, this might have been a different story. When it's just 1 damage, then not as ideal. It's still some cases it will actually have an effect, but I just think that the other raw damage that other C'tans can do sort of largely overlooks the Deceiver. Onto Nightbringer, and again, 1 inch less in movement, which, yeah, don't think was completely necessary. We are getting that 5-up Feel No Pain, which is absolutely welcome, and its Scythe now does d6 plus 2 damage, which will help increase its damage significantly. So now you're doing a minimum of 3 rather than minimum 1 on that bad d6 roll. You just get 1 of those wounds, especially on the dev ones. So I do think that is quite a bit of an improvement for the Nightbringer. I mean, just raw damage improvement, and also having that 5-up Feel No Pain will keep it going much further. So yeah, Nightbringer's seen a bit of an improvement there. And of the specialist C'tans, we now have the Void Dragon, which is almost entirely the same here, minus the 5-up Feel No Pain, which of course is absolutely welcome there to keep on survivability, and obviously the -1 to movement as well for it as well, which I don't really understand when it comes to C'tans, but there it is when they are that slightly bit slower there. I do think with the Nightbringer having that extra 2 damage on its strike ability does make it a little bit more reliable in some ways, but if you are facing a force that is largely vehicle orientated, then the Void Dragon might just take that wee bit ahead. So if you're facing things like Astra, where you know there's probably going to be some mechanized force, then yeah, the Void Dragon would be highly useful there. And we have the Transcendent C'tan, which again, not that much difference between there, except you do have the fact that it has Feel No Pain natively, which is good. They've also picked up that you were giving enhancements to the Transcendent C'tan. They said no more of that, so nope, cannot be given any enhancements anymore. And we come to some of the battle line units, and we're looking at Necron Warriors. So yeah, main change here is of course the numbers Legion rules. Now that you're no longer getting the d6 wounds, and then if you're on objective marker it's d3 plus 3, makes them a little bit less survivable, and by a little I mean by quite a lot. I'd say the favourable side of that is that it does mean that you might look into using Immortals more often, though I think Immortals were starting to be a bit more favourable because of the raw damage that they did offer. But yeah, I think really when it came to the old rule, I think it was favourable to this one, and I would have supported keeping it because I did like the idea of their numbers coming back and maybe having some of the abilities toned down on what they could resurrect as much. But when it's this one, it's just re-roll the d3. Yeah, you're probably going to get a slightly more amount back, where before you were looking at, well, even then you were looking at 1.5, now you're likely to get 2 or 3 back, possibly. Yeah, it just seems to be a rule that I don't think needed to be changed, possibly. Maybe some kind of tweaking, because if you took many blobs of them and they're reanimating so many back at a time, that might not be as ideal, but I do see them being okay. But now the Immortals are becoming a lot more, how can I say, useful in some regards, because they do have largely better stats in different ways. And then we do have the Immortals here, and there has been some slight changes here. The Tesla Carbine has gone up in terms of its range, up to 24 inches. I think that's quite a welcome change. It is still keeping its reroll to wound rolls of 1. If the target is in range of objective marker, you can reroll the wound rolls instead. I think that is really useful for Immortals. Just sort of the midfield clearing, they're not going to really be wanting to sit on objectives. They want to try and help soften up targets that are on objectives for maybe some of your other units to then move in and finish off the job. Now I'm more inclined towards Immortals here because now the Resurrection's less prominent when it comes to Warriors. You do have the extra toughness, you do have the extra save, you are hitting on 3s, you can be 24 inches away and you're putting away 2 attacks. That attack is a higher strength, it's a better AP. A lot of good stuff there, and there is certain things that can make them better as well. For instance, if you take Szeras with them, it will also help because they do have the battle line keyword. So in regard to Immortals, I am looking at them far more favourably now. I really do like the Gauss Blaster. I'm still not so sure on Tesla Carbine against certain armies that don't have as high armour saves. Tesla Carbine might be better, and then you've got abilities that can cause them to crit on 5+. You know, you can take them with certain things. The Plasmancer, that would allow them to crit 5, so then that would be really useful for them. You could also assault and also keep firing with the Tesla Carbine. So there is a lot of use with them there. Something to think about. So you might find that you are going to be favouring a little bit more Immortals now over Warriors. Really interested to hear what people have to say between that. On to the Hexmark Destroyer, and there has been a wee bit of a change here. Now, we've exchanged Precision for Ignore Cover, so you're not going to really be picking off characters and units anymore. But say you wanted to deep strike a Hexmark Destroyer in, really hard to screen just a single model, and if there's units that are hiding in backfield and cover, you can certainly pick them off. So still really good unit for that. And you can still take the Relic, which if you decide to put them in the backfield with other units, as is low and operative, it's hard to really target them. And it means that you can give that 6-inch +1 if you go for Awakened Dynasty. So plenty of use still seeable here for the Hexmark Destroyer. Next we have Lichguard, and oh how this unit has changed. Not so much the unit itself, it's Guardian Protocol being the main change, where you're no longer getting a native -1 to their to win them when they have a noble random. Instead is that if they've got a noble, then if the strength characteristic is greater than their toughness, then it's -1 to win them. But you still, with the Resorb change, no Cryptex, yeah, quite a bit of changes when it comes to their survivability, but I still think they are a very, solid unit. Just they're maybe not the auto take for sort of anchoring down unit, set them on an objective and then say move them, which you're going to have a hard time doing. Now they have got the possibility of actually being moved. We then have Triarch Praetorians, which have gone up a movement, 10-inch movement, which I suppose makes them a little bit more viable on that side as well. But the real problem is that they just struggle in they can hit hard, but they struggle in the survivability. Now having the reroll charge is really useful, so you come in from deep strike in an area your opponent's left vulnerable, and then reroll charge in and hopefully cause some damage. You really want to be targeting units that are sort of harder to bring down infantry, but when they're only 2 damage and strength 5 AP -2 is fine, but and then 3 attacks, they will cause damage, but if anyone's got an invul save they might struggle, and equally they do not have an invul save back, so if they are outmatched they might take a little bit too much damage here. You can see the use here, but I think they are far much of a sort of precision unit. Deep strike them in. Now if they prove to be cheap enough, then yeah, maybe you can actually just deep strike them into objectives in the game and try and hold them down, or contest them from opponent, you reroll and charge in, try and move them off. That's all possible. But there are many sort of, when you look at Lichguard, they were obviously competing for that area, not in terms of movement, but certainly that elite sort of infantry. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the Triarch Praetorians come back from that. Next up is Deathmarks, and they are largely, as far as I can see, unchanged at all, which in some regards is actually a good thing. Deathmarks are pretty darn good. And yeah, not a unit I used much when I was using Necrons in the index phase there, and wish I kind of had. I think they are still pretty good, that they can be used in the Necron Codex as precision ranged units, taking out some leader units, which is handy. And I think you can just have them as 2 5-man squads, maybe going about, just trying to snipe some units coming from deep strike possibly, take an objective, or work as one big squad, and then you've got reanimation and stratagem benefits there as well. Yeah, I really like Deathmarks. The damage 2 part, especially retaining that, makes them a very deadly unit, especially against other leader units. So yeah, I think Deathmarks are absolutely solid still. Flayed Ones next, and again, largely the same here, that they do have their 4 attacks, their hit on 3, strength 4, AP -1, 1 damage, but then all the sustained hits 1 and twin linked as well. But importantly, they do have infiltrators and stealth. Yep, I think not a bad unit. They don't have their deep strike, which they had in earlier editions, so they are keeping on the sort of infiltrate that they'll be able to go onto an objective very, very early or threaten your opponent very, very early into their lines. I think it's one of those units that your opponent needs to think about dealing with quickly and early, otherwise Flayed Ones will either score points or they will just be an absolute pain to deal with later on. I don't think there's any too much difficulty actually dealing with Flayed Ones, so it really depends on their points. I do generally prefer Tomb Blades, so they have taken a little bit of difference in their rules, but generally Tomb Blades have higher mobility, better survivability, and they do a bit more ranged. But generally, if Flayed Ones are quite cheap, they are a unit you can think about putting in onto objectives, and then your opponent is forced to think about them very early on. We now have Crypto Thralls, who've taken a little bit of change here, mainly that they've lost their 4+ Feel No Pain. They did, however, gain an extra wound, so considering we're no longer going to probably be reanimating quite as much, then the 4+ Feel No Pain might not be as bad as just taking an extra wound, but largely, yeah, having that 4+ Feel No Pain, then resurrecting them for further protection was the ideal strategy going forward. It's essentially 6 extra wounds in a unit when you are protecting a Cryptek, but yeah, we'll see if they do continue their use going forward. Tomb Blades have taken a wee bit of a change here, so what are they losing? They are losing their native -1 tit, 5-up invul, and the access to 3-up save without reduction in movement. What they have gained is 6 inches to their Tesla. They can get stealth, they can get a 3-up save, but it comes with attacks of their movement, and they can move 6 inches after shooting. I really do like the rules, I just don't know if it works quite as well as how I used them in the past, which is get onto objectives quick and try and hunker down as much as possible, then escape. The reduction in survivability is certainly not ideal, though the being able to move after shooting can open up a few options there. But I really didn't take them for damage dealing, I really took them for getting onto objectives really quick, and because of their 5-up invul and their minuses to hit, there was quite a bit of advantages for them. Now it just does not seem quite as ideal for Tomb Blades, really depending on their cost, but now if you're looking for objective hunting, there might be more favourable units now. We then have the Skorpekh Destroyers. In a lot of ways they have stayed the same, but the Whirling Onslaught ability has changed. So instead of the sort of ignoring all modifiers, they now reroll hit rolls of 1 natively, and if they made a charge roll, they actually reroll all hit rolls instead. So I really like that. It makes them a far more aggressive unit. You just want to charge in there and absolutely cause havoc. Rerolling all those hits is going to be fantastic. Take some plasma sights with you, and you might get some devastating wounds. If you also have the Skorpekh Lord as well, that will certainly help as well. So yeah, I really think that the Skorpekh Destroyers might have a way forward if you want to have a fairly tough unit that can just try and get across the board fairly quickly and hopefully cause some damage. Maybe set at a point. I don't think they really want to set at a point actually, but they certainly want to be able to find those ones that your opponent does get onto objectives and just charge in and cause havoc. So maybe we might see a bit of a resurgence in Skorpekh Destroyers. Lichguard no longer being as efficient at being able to reduce damage. Let's see if Skorpekh Destroyers now improvement in damage makes them more tempting to take. Ophydian Destroyers next, and again, not so many differences here. They did get an increase in movement by 1 inch, and I think again you are just playing these for objectives. Now they do have the important Tunneling Horrors, which does allow them quite a bit of mobility throughout the board. I think when it comes to mobility, there are actually a number of units that they are contesting for this, but the important side is they can really deploy really fast. So it allows them to get onto, say, an objective marker your opponent's pretty much given up on, that they can then bury them way down and get onto that objective marker very, very quick. So I don't see many people taking large units of these, but certainly a small unit to be able to just redeploy somewhere is something worth considering. Come to Lokhust Destroyers next, and the main difference here is that they still have the, if they want to reroll 1's tit, it needs to be the closest eligible target. But if the target attack is within range of an objective marker, you get to reroll all hit rolls instead. So they are quite good if they're going to be clearing off objective markers. So your enemy has some units on an objective marker that, well, they're not the most survivable, then these guys might be able to clear them quite easily. Now, they are competing against Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, and in general I find the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers probably be a bit more efficient. There's a few buffs that they can do as well to make them even better. So I do find it a bit more difficult. I really don't like that you have to target the closest unit to get the reroll hit rolls of 1, unless it is on an objective. I can see use for them there, and I'm glad that they did get a little bit of a buff up, but when you're competing against so many other units and you're also got the Heavy Destroyers, it can make it sort of which one's going to be more efficient between the two of those units there. I have had some success just keeping 1 or 2 on objectives and have them floating around, but generally if you're floating around looking for objectives, there are so many units in this codex that can actually compete for that role. Moving on to the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, and it really was them that got a bit more favoured over the regular Lokhust Destroyers. And you can see why, with the Exterminator getting in rapid fire range is a huge amount of shots each, and even the Gauss Destroyer, the Ghost Destroyer, is a huge amount of damage potential as well. They still retain their rule for optimised for slaughter, and generally still an absolutely powerful unit. So yeah, I do think, still I kind of favour the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers, though then again the new ability where if you are planning to clear off objectives, you might actually find that the just regular Lokhust Destroyers, if you're facing the right opponent with 2 wounds, they're under toughness 5, then yeah, they might be a favourable one. But I think the Lokhust Heavy Destroyers may be better for the more generalist use. That Exterminator is really good for just powering away with a whole bunch of shots. If you've got single wound models, they're going to take a lot of wound damage there, and potentially even 2 or 3 ones just with the volume of shots there is quite good. So yeah, I really do like the Heavy Destroyers a lot. And when it comes to Canoptek Reanimator, there's not much to say here except having that reduction of its Nanoscab Reanimator beam from 12 inches to 3 inches really does hurt the unit quite a lot. Beforehand it was covering a huge amount of the battlefield with its 12-inch aura. Now 3 inches just seems to be a little bit less useful. It's more like you're going to be sort of going along with the units and babysitting along with them, rather than maybe you could hide away and just still keep clipping that 12 inches away. I think it really does hurt the Canoptek Reanimator quite a lot, just reducing that range quite significantly. With the classic Canoptek Scarab Swarms, bit of an odd unit here. They don't really offer damage outside their mortal wounds, they don't have the most durability, don't really do objective controlling very well. Now they do have abilities to kind of, reduce an opponent's objective control and gain some themselves if they are near a Cryptek model, but generally I find them to be more sort of a nuisance unit after all. Can be really hard to target with ranged because they are so small, but I think they are just going to be a nuisance unit, and generally there are a few other units that they're probably going to be more in points, but they actually can control objectives, they can do some damage, or they might have some durability. Scarabs have none of that. If they're cheap enough, they can maybe float around the field, something that your opponent might forget about, and then they'll end up being a nuisance somewhere. But in many areas they're not offering quite as much. And with Canoptek Spyders, I don't think there's been too many changes when it comes to them. Mainly the fact that they still can offer a couple of uses. Now on the backfield vehicles, I suppose that you can go along with them and offer their 6-up Feel No Pain, keeping some backfield vehicles I suppose, or front if you decide to go that way. Or even if you want to move around with protection and offer protection against psychic attacks and mortal wounds. It's not as good as when it was 4+ psychic attacks, but now that it covers mortal wounds as well, it's a bit more varied. And if you are playing against psychic armies, they are really quite helpful. On to a personal favourite unit of mine, which is Canoptek Wraiths, though not so much in this edition. And in many ways they are largely not changed, which you can see a little bit of difference when it comes to their whip coils, but generally they're not quite as efficient as I'd like them to be. Now, there are a number of areas that they might improve in. Now, keep in mind you can give them 4 pinball, they can go with the Technomancer, that'll give them 5-up Feel No Pain, making them quite an enduring unit. And they are ultimately quite fast. If you give the Technomancer possibly the infiltration rule, if you take their sort of detachment, that'll help as well, get them into some key positions. I think mainly as their accuracy is lacking, which is a bit of a pain there. Possibly you might see them with Canoptek Court, might really resolve a number of their accuracy issues. Just generally I'd love to see them a bit more in the field. I love Canoptek Wraiths, love the models, used them in a lot of previous editions because they were so tough to bring down. Now it's not so much the case, they don't quite offer as much punch as they used to. Still a cool unit. Interested to see what people have to say to them. Are there still more units that probably outshine them? Skorpekh Destroyers, for one, really do cause quite a lot of damage, but certainly when it comes to survivability, I'd probably say the Canoptek Wraiths have it. Certainly if you put them with a Technomancer. Coming up to the Triarch Stalker next, and again, not so many areas have changed here. Now, one thing it did get was Scout 8, which seems a bit unusual for a Triarch Stalker, but I guess it's to try and get it into range a little bit quicker, strip away cover. It is a useful ability. There will be some units that hunker down and cover and make them real pains to get rid of, and this will help in its own side. But its own damage is still a little bit lackluster, and you might actually just prefer putting your points into raw damage rather than trying to take a unit that is possibly a little bit pricey and its benefit is mediocre at best. Well, no, removing cover is not bad, but again, it's one of those ones that it just does not offer enough for the amount of cost it usually is. So, depending on the cost, it might be worth taking, but really I do not see it when you can just have some other sort of far more just raw damage units in your force. Next we have the Canoptek Doomstalker, and yeah, again, not so many areas changed here, and I don't think that's maybe a good thing. It really needed to change its stratagem, its ability about stratagems here, specifically the Fire Overwatch. I think it's largely overshadowed by the Doomsday arc, and so I think it needs to think of something different to do here when it next gets turns at rules. Doomsday arc may be better staying still and keeping far away, while the Canoptek Doomstalker should possibly be more powerful as it gets closer to the enemy. That would maybe make a bit more of a distinction there between the two of them, but so far Fire and Overwatch, really with this weapon, it can be doable, but it's maybe not the best one. Suppose if you are facing, let's say, a big unit of Terminators, then yeah, you might want to fire the Doomsday Blaster at it, but overall I'm not that impressed with it. If you're maybe going to Canoptek Court, yeah, maybe you might be able to be within the Power Matrix range at most times, and then you get your reroll hits, but just generally it seems to be that the Doomsday Arc is a little bit more efficient. Next we have the Annihilation Barge, and in many ways is similar, that it hasn't changed too much here either. Yeah, I just find that again this is probably a bit of a niche unit, that if you are facing particular armies with low armor saves, orcs, demons, Drukhari, high volume of shots, high amount of strength, but no AP, yeah, this one can really work out quite well. But against anything with an armor value, I really think this thing does not need to show up. A lot of its shots might just bounce off them. And on to the iconic Doomsday Arc. Now it is strength 18. Don't know what justified it going up from strength 15 to 18. I suppose to make it much more reliable to wound things that are toughness 8 and 9, which is very welcome, I guess. And yeah, that's pretty good. It's cannot go wrong with one or two of these in the backfield. Stay still, hit on 2s, dev wounds, you know, they're just all fairly reliable. Even if you are on the move, you can also have that enhancement that does give you +1 to your hits if you're within 6 inches of the model. I can certainly see units of Doomsday Arcs in the backfield benefiting from that if they're wanting to move. Does mean they lose their dev wounds if they do that, but it just keeps the accuracy up a bit more. But yep, Doomsday Arc, even more powerful I guess than before. On to the troop transport of the Ghost Arc here, and I suppose it's not really changed that much. The main change is that, of course, how warriors have changed, and your ability to reanimate them is probably not as efficient anymore. Yes, you are still able to reanimate them once per turn just after an enemy has finished attacking them, but you are no longer reanimating D6 and possibly more when you're on objectives. You just get to reroll the amount of wounds that you do reanimate. So they were a staple beforehand, and with the Resorb change, etc., it's maybe not as efficient to go with warrior blobs. Maybe it might be better to sit the warriors inside there and take a smaller unit and try and, you know, go for hunkering down on objective. That might work out as well. But yeah, Ghost Arc has seen a bit of a change only because of how warriors and I guess resurrection bonuses work as well. We now next go on to the flyers, and we have the Doom Scythe here. And it has had quite a big change in terms of its ability. Its ability now affects all units, not just infantry, which I think is helps massively, because you really don't want to fire this thing too much at infantry as such, You could, but not so much unless it was something that was particularly heavy. Now it's a case of if something survives being hit by the Doom Scythe, it will take a bit of a punishment. So that is quite good as well. So you might be more inclined to target vehicles and monsters, do damage if survive, yeah, they get a bit of a debuff. So it does make the Doom Scythe a bit more worth taking. And the next flyer is the Night Scythe, and largely the same here, except it does have this Quantum Invader rule, which does allow this model to set up in the reinforcement step for your first, second or third movement phase, regardless of the mission rules. It does help out a lot. We did need to get it in on the field a bit earlier so it can deploy its troops a bit earlier, but simply put, I just don't find that flyers transporting, well, troops, etc., just are struggling quite a wee bit there as well. So I'm not convinced by it, but at least it is able to come in earlier to be able to deploy that bit quicker. When we come to a unit that has struggled for many editions now, and it is of course the Obelisk. So its ability has changed a wee bit here, that it does now half movement characteristics of models and half advance and charge rolls, which is a lot better than just reducing it by 2. So that is a bit more useful, and obviously does have its sustained hits too with its Tesla spheres. I just think it needs to have a large more impact on units, so maybe it needs to be, it can, land in the centre of the board and slow multiple units, which would be very, very impactful if it does. But for the amount of points you are investing in such a unit, slowing down units is good, but only one unit is just possibly not enough for such a centrepiece model. And the damage it does is not quite as effective there, especially when you put in the points. There are things of similar points that just do damage a lot better. Next, for the large scale units, we have the Tesseract Vault. Again, largely as far as I can see here, it's not changed too much, except for one key area, is that you can now choose 2 C'tan powers instead of 1 to actually activate, except when you're a bit of damaged, 1 to 8 wounds remaining, then you can only choose one of them. That really does improve it quite significantly. I wish you could choose to use the same power twice, because there are niche moments where you really need to just use those moments and target down a unit, rather than you're going to have to split between it, and you might find the second one's just not suitable at the time. Maybe the positioning's not ideal. But generally you can now have the 2 powers, and I think that is a lot more useful for the Tesseract Vault. So I do think that's a bit better on that side. Whether it is worth still the amount of points it's going to be that it will cost will be debatable, but we do find that the C'tan powers are quite powerful in certain situations. And we come finally to the fortification for the Necrons, the Convergence of Dominion. Now, it has gone down in toughness, so toughness down to 9, and its wounds are down to 7, so a little bit less in terms of survivability there, I guess. And it's also gone down to a 3+ save. And his ability has changed as well, that instead of being able to reroll the dice to determine how many wounds are reanimated, it gives units around it Feel No Pain of 6+, and it's only for infantry. I'd argue in a lot of ways this has actually got worse than it was before. At least beforehand you could reroll reanimations, that would be quite happy. But really this is only offering it for infantry in your backfield now, and I just don't see that really being the case anymore. So yeah, not really happy with Convergence of Dominion. I didn't think it could get worse. Apparently it could, maybe I'm missing something there. But yeah, not very ideal for them. And on to the mighty Monolith. Slight change in stats here, so it has gone up 2 wounds, but it has gone down a toughness. I suppose that's to make it a bit easier to wound if you are firing with like strength 7 or something. But generally, you are playing this the same as before. It's going to be a big block, and it's got some heavy firepower, and it's got its gate for some movement, and with the new sort of detachment rule, you might actually find a bit more use for that going forward. So yeah, the Monolith might actually see a little bit more use due to its gate. Certainly if you've got the ability to be able to come out of that gate and charge for 2 command points, that will be quite a useful ability in itself. And that is it for my review of the Necron Codex. A lot to cover there. There's quite a few datasheets in this codex. What are your thoughts? Anything I missed out? Any combinations that are looking quite well? Does it work towards your playstyle? Are you ranged? Are you combat? Do you like the abilities there where you can redeploy sort of units through the monolith, etc.? Lots of things to discuss there. My overall main thought is that they have seen what the main abilities are, and certainly when it comes to reanimation, decided to try and rebalance in some ways. Now, how positive a thing that is, I'm not sure. I just think reanimation is the rule that I've seen that has been a massive problem in earlier editions, and then later on it's been pointless. It's just such a hard rule. Giving free units away, essentially to recover them, is just a difficult thing to balance, and that's quite tricky. But I do see plenty of cool stuff here. I think that now that they have taken some of the key units and maybe not made them as must-takes, it is going to open up the playing field a wee bit there as well. So yeah, that's my thoughts. Please comment, share, like and subscribe. Very excited to hear what people think of the Necron Codex. And there's going to be a few people annoyed and a few people quite happy, because different playstyles might open a bit. So thanks again, and we'll see you on our Tabletop Assault Battle Report.